This is a follow-up to our benchmark of Denuvo's impact on performance and loading times. If you haven't watched that video yet, you can do so later. In the comments section, Ken Robinson wanted to know the impact Denuvo has on installation size and how much it's lowered when it's patched out. This is a response to that request. Most Denuvo implementations work by protecting the exe, and thus most of the impact it has on storage space is confined to the exe. Consequently, the impact is on the scale of megabytes, but we still think it's interesting how much space Denuvo occupies, or rather how much of the game is actually Denuvo. For instance, Voxy, a hacker who cracked several Denuvo-protected titles, had this to say about the implementation in Puyo Tetris. So I downloaded Puyo Tetris. I thought, it's a small game. It'd be easier to analyze, but oh no. The game executable is 128 megabytes big, of which just 5 to 6 megabytes is the real game code. The rest of it is Denuvo. It's the most bloated Denuvo I've ever seen. While this forms the first data point in our examination, this is the only instance where Voxy talked about file sizes. Nevertheless, we can follow Ken Robinson's suggestion and compare file sizes before and after Denuvo was removed. Let's start with Rime, a game that was notorious for its terrible implementation of Denuvo. The game originally launched with an exe that weighed in at 160 megabytes. After Denuvo was removed, the exe shed 113.3 megabytes, dropping down to 46.7 megabytes. Just 29.19% of what it was while Denuvo was still in place. In other words, the Denuvo protected build was 342.6% as large as the Denuvo free build. Let's move on to Abzu, the GOG version of which dropped not just Denuvo, but also the DRM it used to protect, Steam. While Denuvo was in place, the game's exe took up 96.2 megabytes. After Denuvo was removed, the exe shed 53 megabytes, dropping down to 43.2 megabytes. Just 44.91% of what it was while Denuvo was still in place. In other words, the Denuvo protected build was 222.7% as large as a Denuvo free build. Next up is Bulletstorm Full Clip Edition. While Denuvo was in place, the game's exe took up 144 megabytes. After Denuvo was removed, the exe lost 85.8 megabytes, dropping down to 58.2 megabytes. Just 40.42% of what it was while Denuvo was still in place. In other words, the Denuvo protected build was 247.4% as large as a Denuvo free build. Moving on to Dishonored 2, the performance of which we benchmarked in our previous video. While it was protected by Denuvo, the game's exe occupied 108 megabytes. After the developers removed Denuvo, the exe dropped 67.3 megabytes and was now just 40.7 megabytes, 37.69% of what it was previously. The Denuvo protected build was 265.4% as large as the exe without Denuvo. While we're at it, let's look at Dishonored's standalone expansion, Death of the Outsider. Before Denuvo was removed, the game's exe weighed in at 159 megabytes. After Denuvo was removed, the exe shed 117.1 megabytes, dropping to 41.9 megabytes, just 26.35% of what it was before the removal. In other words, the Denuvo protected exe was 379.5% as large as the unprotected exe. Next up is Lords of the Fallen, a game that still carries Denuvo in the Steam build. In the Denuvo protected build, the game's exe takes up 45.9 megabytes. When Denuvo was removed for the GOG build, the exe lost 35 megabytes, dropping down to 10.9 megabytes. Just 23.75% of the Denuvo protected exe. In other words, the Denuvo protected build is 421.1% as large as a Denuvo free build. Let's move on to Mad Max, a game that, much like Lords of the Fallen, may or may not have Denuvo depending on where you bought it. The Steam version still carries Denuvo, while the Origin build does not. The Denuvo protected exe takes up 73.2 megabytes, 298.8% as much as the Denuvo free exe, which takes up just 24.5 megabytes. Next up is Mass Effect Andromeda. While Denuvo was still in place, the game's exe took up 133 megabytes. After Denuvo was removed, the exe dropped 60.9 megabytes, coming down to 72.1 megabytes. 54.21% of what it was before the removal. In other words, the Denuvo protected build was 184.5% as large as the unprotected EXE. This is a good time to look at the loading times for Mass Effect Andromeda, which we somehow forgot to mention in previous videos. Before Denuvo was removed, the game took 50 seconds to load the main menu for the first time, though this dropped to 38.13 seconds on subsequent runs. After Denuvo was removed, the game took 44.72 seconds to load the main menu for the first time, dropping to 25.55 seconds on subsequent runs. Looking at the average of multiple runs, the Denuvo protected version was 25.42% slower than the unprotected build at loading the main menu. Once the main menu was loaded, how long did the game take to load the mission we benchmarked for our performance test? While Denuvo was in place, the game took 59 seconds to load the mission for the first time, dropping to 45 seconds on subsequent runs. After Denuvo was removed, the game took 49.65 seconds to load the mission for the first time, dropping to 34.61 seconds on subsequent runs. Looking at the average of multiple runs, the Denuvo protected version was 23.427% slower than the unprotected build. Next up is Hitman. While Denuvo was in place, the game's executable occupied 81.3 megabytes. After Denuvo was removed, the EXE shared 49.6 megabytes, dropping down to 31.7 megabytes, just 38.99% of what it was before the removal. In other words, the Denuvo protected EXE was 256.5% as large as the unprotected executable. Did loading times suffer a similar impact? While Denuvo was in place, Hitman took 30.77 seconds to load the main menu for the first time, dropping to 26.19 seconds on subsequent runs. After Denuvo was removed, Hitman took 30.4 seconds to load the main menu for the first time, dropping to 21.91 seconds on subsequent runs. Looking at the average of multiple runs, the Denuvo protected version took 8.9% longer to load the main menu. Once at the main menu, how long did Hitman take to load Paris, the first mission of the game? While Denuvo was still in place, Hitman took 27 seconds to load Paris for the first time, dropping to 17.55 seconds on subsequent runs. After Denuvo was removed, Hitman took 25.6 seconds to load Paris for the first time, dropping to 12.65 seconds on subsequent runs. Looking at the average of multiple runs, the Denuvo protected build was 28.16% slower at loading Paris. On to Agents of Mayhem. While Denuvo was in place, the game's EXE took up a massive 156 megabytes. After Denuvo was removed, the game dropped an incredible 129.1 megabytes, coming down to 26.9 megabytes, just 17.24% of what it was before the removal. In other words, the Denuvo protected EXE was 579.9% as large as the unprotected EXE. Next up is Sniper Ghost Warrior 3. While Denuvo still protected the game, its EXE weighed in at 148 megabytes. After Denuvo was removed, the EXE shared 110.5 megabytes, dropping down to exactly 37.5 megabytes, just 25.34% of what it used to be. In other words, the Denuvo protected EXE was 394.7% the size of the unprotected EXE. Were loading times similarly impacted? While Denuvo was in place, the game took 35.17 seconds to load the main menu for the first time, dropping to 27.11 seconds on subsequent runs. After Denuvo was removed, the game took 34 seconds to load the main menu for the first time, dropping to 25.81 seconds on subsequent runs. Looking at the average of multiple runs, the Denuvo protected version was 5.05% slower at loading the main menu than the unprotected build. Once the main menu was loaded, how long did the game take to load the mission we used to benchmark our performance test? While Denuvo was still in place, the game hovered on 81 to 82 seconds on first and subsequent runs. After Denuvo was removed, the game took around 73 to 74 seconds on first and subsequent runs. Looking at the average of multiple runs, the Denuvo protected version was 9.17% slower at loading the benchmarking mission. Our final comparison looks at Moto Racer 4, another game we benchmarked in our previous video. Before Denuvo was removed, the game's EXE occupied 101 megabytes. After Denuvo was removed, the EXE shared 46.7 megabytes, dropping down to 54.3 megabytes, 53.76% of what it was previously. In other words, the Denuvo protected build was 186% as large as the Denuvo free build. That wraps up our comparison. In a response to our last video, we received a request for a summary to make our data easier to digest. Looking at the average of all file sizes, the Denuvo protected builds were on average 455% the size of the unprotected EXEs. When Denuvo was removed, the EXEs shed an average of 79.92 megabytes, dropping to 33% of what they were previously. That concludes our analysis of Denuvo's bloat. If you like this video, please share it. There is more content like this on the way, so please like, subscribe and press the bell button so you don't miss out. Do you play Rainbow Six Siege or Dota 2? Check out the other channel for analytical guides for both games. Link is in the description and on the screen. While you're here, feel free to watch our playlist on hardware analysis of CPUs and GPUs, our 4-part Denuvo analysis of where we explore its history, its performance impact and why developers stick with it even after it's cracked, and our 3-part analysis of the DRM stronger than Denuvo, where we explore what it does and compare its success with Denuvo.